Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another Positivity Hack Delivered. This time with me, Beata Young, we welcome Amy Gehring and Michelle Gialanze. So, just to get us started, let's start with our first speaker, and then we'll move on to the visual artist who is going to deliver us beautiful art today as we speak. Amy Gehring, she's the expert in the field of visual thinking. She comes from USA, currently stranded in
Morocco,
enjoying martial arts, not really martial arts, what I wanted to say. So we are all enjoying our lockdown moments and we want to bring some positivity. Thank you very much for joining us today. So
thank you for having me.
Thank you, Amy. Amy, you started your journey with visual thinking some time ago, and it turned out to be a successful story for you. And just to give a little bit of background, because I think not everybody realizes, and that's a little story. A NASA engineer decided to see how much creative we are when we are born. And it turned out that about 95% where kids are born, and he looked through the process of growing up, and kids who were born creative, they were about 95% creativity level, they turned out to go down on creativity. About 3% of the whole research group turned out to be creative. So is it school that kills creativity, or is it work that kills creativity? We'll try to answer these questions. Meanwhile, let's move on to our beautiful artist who's speaking from her little layer somewhere in, is it Gargur today, Michelle, in Malta?
Yes, in Gargur, which is a very small village in Malta.
But very picturesque. I highly encourage you to visit it. And Michelle is a fine artist, but she's holding many traits. So Michelle recently had her exhibition at the Royal Art Academy, and I was pleased to visit her exhibition in the silent city of Medina. I think there is many more silent cities nowadays in Malta. I'm speaking from one at the moment. I'm speaking from Valletta. And Michelle, could you tell us a little bit about what you're planning to do today?
Thank you, Beata, for this. This is a great fun. I'm looking forward to doing it. I'm going to doodle. I'm going to just doodle while Amy takes us through her journey, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what Amy's saying. I hope I won't get too distracted and forget what my job is here today. But yeah, I'm just going to scribble away while Amy talks.
Excellent. Excellent, fabulous news. Thank you so much, Misha. So we'll let you work in the background while Amy is going to tell us what really is the creative process. What is the visual thinking definition?
Yeah, so I also actually went to art school and graduated a fine art degree and majored in graphic design. And while I was doing that, I learned a lot about a lot of types of design, but I never really approached or understood that what I was doing was solving problems through an actual process of visual thinking. And so visual thinking can be considered an effective communication tool to improve efficiency and consistency in businesses, but also just general problem solving. And so if you think about it, we all do some form of visual thinking. Every time we walk into a room, we start to absorb the information around us and to make decisions about what the visuals around us mean. And we decide what relationships they have to us. And visual thinking is just taking that and applying it to business concepts or ideologies or processes as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. So what are the benefits of using visual thinking?
Yeah, so information can get complex really fast, especially where we are at with internet and always having access to information. And visual thinking can actually simplify that complexity in a way so that you can explain what it is you're learning or what you're teaching or your problem in a way that answers the traditional questions that we have: who, what, when, why, how, or how much. It can be applied to data, and it can also be applied to those concepts or processes I talked about. But it allows us to increase comprehension. It gives our messages a little more stickiness after people can remember the visual. And the visuals can allow you to create more emotional connection to your information. And it allows for people to learn a little more easily. So one example I have is to help people understand why it's beneficial is that it's a way of objectifying information. And if you and a friend were not in quarantine and you were going for a ride in a car somewhere, you could probably argue about how far you are from your destination if you had no map. But as soon as you have a map, it objectively tells you where you are in relation to where you want to go. And so the visual is actually helping you objectify and create a baseline of common understanding. And so if you got it and you apply that to business, can allow the business to get on the same baseline of understanding. So more effective decision making can happen, or just you make sure that everyone has a universal understanding. So.
Excellent. So I would compare it to maybe like a, kind of brainstorming session. So when you've got a brainstorming session,
yeah,
and it's like a kind of a cooking popcorn, right? Popcorn goes everywhere if you don't put a lid on top. Whereas with visual thinking, you've got tools to put a lid on top and kind of structure it and have more coherent outcome. Would that work?
Yeah, that's a really good. Yeah, that's a really good example. It sort of puts boundaries on the information you're trying to process, and so the boundaries allow you to understand more clearly, and that's like that lid on the pot that you're talking about.
Excellent. So how exactly does visual thinking apply to the business process and startups?
Yeah, and so I think people in IT, they're already using visual thinking in a way, even if they're not sure that they are. So if you think about a Gantt chart or a user experience journey map, or even like if you get very into business model process notation, those are all forms of visual thinking. And so we're aware of those already. And so what I've been working to do is to identify more ways that visual thinking can actually bridge knowledge gaps. And it allows for you to simplify information. So I've seen it have both benefit internally and externally. So internally it allows for people to create, like I said, that baseline of understanding, but it allows leadership to improve consistency and efficiency internally by helping with recruitment. I've seen people use their visual thinking for explaining their process and finding people who align with that process. And I've also seen them use it for training. Then this externally, you can also use it to attract customers or convert them into customers, because if they understand what you are doing, or if your message is a little, like we said, had that sticky factor where they are remembering the visual, it increases your brand awareness. So some very tangible ways. I've also used it to help link business models visually. So like taking a 17-page business plan and turning it into something visual that shows exactly how the business will operate in the marketplace, and where there's technical information flowing from different parties and where the revenue streams are coming through. So it can really be useful in business with some practice.
So let me just kind of start from the beginning. So how do I start?
Yeah.
So I want to do visual thinking, and what do I do apart from taking a pen?
Yeah, let me actually share my screen. I think that, of course, visual thinking can be understood a bit better with, all right, entire screen.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous.
Okay, so
here we
if I
are.
was starting, yes, if I was starting a visual thinking model or a visual, first I would look at getting the growth designer, the data part of me wants to look at what information I have. And if it's a data visual, of course, we have maybe spreadsheets or things like that, but if it's a conceptual model, you still have information and inputs. And so you want to gather all your information and just say, like, what does this look like and what relationship does it have to each other? And then the second part is the function, and what do you need to do? How do you need to, like, what does the visual need to accomplish? So I found this strategy, or this state, is very important to sort of define where you're going to go. Is it a process? Is it, like I said, part to a whole? So like if it's one something. So that part is very key to set up at the beginning. And then the next thing is to establish what I call coordinates. Like if you were a data processor, you know the coordinates, the X and Y coordinates. But here I'm replacing them with the questions that we've all learned for problem solving: who, where, when, how, why, and how much. And those can become like a grid for you to figure out how to show your information. So here's an example of how this is used in data: the how much and the who and the what, or when if it's a timeline or a process. Getting a few more elements with more complex data, you might have a where and a how much, a who and a what. You can start to add layers like that. And this next one is very simple, and I'll have some examples if we want to look at them later, of how you can use this process for visual thinking process to outline what your process is and how you can accomplish a goal. And so this last one is, how is it happening? Why? What is the correlation of going through this process and what is being accomplished by your business? And then of course the when, like how much time, what is your timeline? And so that's how I get started. Of course, there's also very tangible things, like I always start with a wireframe. This will need to sort of think about what are the pieces and elements that are important. This, as mentioned earlier, it's creativity and it is a setting up. So the wireframe allows me to take my user experience skills and use UI skills to take that process into the visual thinking model and set up the story that I want to tell. And when I'm doing that, I'm thinking about, are there any gaps that the audience has? So like, are there like gaps in knowledge? Is there a communication gap that we have to move over? Is there sort of a motivation gap to pay attention? So you want to address all of those things in your visuals. A whole nother process for timeline and process visuals as well.
So if I spoke to an average entrepreneur now, was maybe not walking on the street, but speaking to him on LinkedIn, and I told him, you've got to use visual thinking because people now, there's so much data around us. we don't have time to read. So you need to use visual thinking. And he says, oh, it's too much. I already have got this tool, that tool, and I've got, all the social media and so on. How to make this process less labor intensive? Is there a way to make it less labor intensive? Because you don't need some devices, you don't need some funky new program for it, do you?
No, you don't have to. Of course, if you already have social media, you're probably already using a design tool of some sort to make your visuals. And you don't need to be an advanced graphic designer in order to use visual thinking for your business. If you can draw simple shapes, and which you can in slide deck presentation software or things like Canva, a few information design accounts, but whatever you're using for what other design purposes you have for your business, you can just use that to draw. It's more about the relationship of the elements on the page than it is about the technical execution. I mean, and I'm saying that as a designer. So a lot of my end results, they're very simple. And it's more about how they relate to one another, and most of what I do usually ends up in a slide deck or a presentation, so it has to be fairly simple so people can sort of bring in the elements one at a time. And so if you can just do the basic shapes, it's more about that's why we include the word thinking in it. It's more about the mindset than it is about the tools and the labor intensive pieces of it to be effective.
Excellent. So guys, bear with us. Don't go to Doodle yet. Don't go to your whiteboards or whatever tools you have at your disposal, and use your imagination. And before you do that, just remember that famous painter Claude Monet was colorblind. So everybody's born creative, and everybody can be creative. So we are in Malta, the country of so many churches, that I was really confused when I asked for direction, and the woman said, oh, it's next to this church, and I didn't know even which church she meant, because there were 3 churches on the square. So and as we know, religion uses lots of visuals, right? They use lots of symbols, so we already know it applies in our daily life. We use emoticons so much, right? So everybody can be creative.
Absolutely. And I think that it's more about creating an awareness of things that you're already doing, and taking that and empowering it into your business communication. And so like I started at the beginning, a lot of it is about looking around you and then deciding which information is important to see and understand and to call out, and what is the most important way or most important thing to communicate about the information you're trying to present. And our brains are doing that automatically all the time as we're walking around our day. And so it's more about harnessing something you're already doing, just fine-tuning it and practicing it.
So, in other words, it's a lot of imagination, using your imaginative power, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be a big part of your imagination. I always thought is noticing what's around you and making new connections with that. And so I think there was, forgive me, there's philosophy of copy, combine, and transform to create innovative solutions. And so a lot of that is taking what resources you already have in front of you and figuring out new ways to connect it. And that also applies to visual thinking.
Exactly. So just to get down on the track, back to the track. So visual thinking, how do you use this? What would be the basic tips of visual thinking, and how do you use this processing data visuals?
Yeah, so part of my career I spend in entrepreneurship and visual thinking. But another part of my career, I actually do growth design, which a lot of growth design is based on using data to make decisions and then taking that data and explaining it to other people to see how you're meeting your goals. And so I've taken this and started to apply it to data as well. And as you can see from what we already talked about identifying what information you have and what function it needs to serve. If you start to look at your data visuals in the same way, you can start to tell a very compelling story for what you want to accomplish. And so, like, depending on what your laser focused goal is, will depend on how you interpret your data. And data is useless unless we're drawing insights from it. And so this is one way that you can take this process and look at your data and say, like, what information do I have? How is it related to one another? Identifying the type of input you have. And then what do I need it to do? What do I need it to say in order to tell my story or in order to find insights from it?
Mm. So in other words, basic tools, which I think apply as well, is be creative, but also make sure that you use symbols. So, for example, I don't know, what would be the basic symbols or tools that you could use? Just to give a little bit of.
Yeah, so I think some of the basic symbols are, first of all, color, of course. So the way you color, it says a lot to us before we even know what it's saying. And the biggest thing here is to know things like basic color science, which is helpful in any part of your life, about like how warm colors, they tend to advance. So that's like your reds, oranges, those, they advance toward the eye. They'll call attention. So this is why red is used for like alarm or to be dominant. Like that's why the stop sign is, because scientifically it's advancing in our brain. So it's creating attention to it. And it's the same as yellow is alertness. So you'll see a lot of like alert signs in yellow. But you can only do it to create sort of a state of mental alertness. And then on the opposite side, cool colors recede. So if you're trying to create a calming presence, like blue is often used for that. You'll notice a lot of banks or those types of things use blue, or healthcare or banks and sort of things. A lot of times they use blue because it has that calming, like trusting feel. And green is fresh and new. But something we do have to be aware of is there, like, cause different cultural contexts in every country. So you have to watch out for your biases, like how you think color is, and if you're presenting something maybe somewhere else where color is used in a different way. With the internet, we're becoming more and more of a global economy, and so being aware of that is really important. And I don't know how many data scientists.
Like give a simple example. Explosion is excitement, right? I don't know. The distance can be shown as well through visuals. And we've got a question today from Olga, who joined us again. And thank you very much, everybody, for welcoming us. And it's a great question from Olga. What are some examples of visuals you have done in business, Amy?
Yeah, let me share. I have a few that I am allowed to share, not all of them always, if they're for internal company use.
Good. Excellent.
But I have a few. Going back to your other question, maybe this is what you're looking for, but these are some common visual cues we can use to create relationships to different objects. But let me go forward a little bit. So I understand this is an entrepreneurship group, so I thought I would start with this one. This is a model I created for someone in the US who does like economic analysis and how entrepreneurship can impact an economy. And so it looks very simple. Again, you don't have to be a like as talented as Michelle to do this. You can do this with simple shapes. So what this is their model of how an entrepreneurial ecosystem needs to work in order for it to be healthy. And so they put their entrepreneurs, those are the individual actors in the middle, and then they have 4 different parts that are included. And so, and that is wrapped around with the ecosystem or community mission, vision, and what metrics they're measuring. And so this is something that they use on the front page of their website. It's also something that they use to help economic developers understand entrepreneurship, because this is actually quite new how economic entities are starting to work with entrepreneurs to figure out what they need to improve. So that's something that he does. This is an example that I created for a growth hacker, and they needed to explain how growth works across analytics, product, and the brand, and how the experimentation is the top bar of it, that up upon these 3 pillars of the growth model, there's this constant experimentation happening. And that over time, as you move through this, you help define market fit with quick learning through the iterative process. So like if we're going back to what we're talking about, like how did I come up with this structure, it's like I looked at, she gave me a spreadsheet of everything she does, which is amazing. But she needed to present it to a group or to C-level executives, and she needed it to be a little short and sweet and give the high-level overview to allow for some context. And so this was sort of like that first introduction to growth for people. And then she can dive into the layers of her growth process.
Excellent.
Yeah, and this was used in a competition actually for a startup in the healthcare industry. They were creating a network, and they had so many groups of people involved in their business model. And so this is something that we created to show how all of these entities, what the relationship was to one another. Yeah, so like
this one that is very kind of monochromatic. It doesn't use much color. Is there a reason for that?
They had color in other areas of their presentation, and so this was mostly like this sort of as they presented this, they would have faded one entity or layer in at a time. So like the 4 circles would have came in first. Like these are the 4 groups of people who were working in the market. So they not only had a double-sided market, but they had like 4 sides to the market that they had to recruit. So those would fade in first. And the AHAC, which is in the USA, they're like rural healthcare networks, would be in the middle, because that's who connects all 4 sides of this market. And
and there is a little chain symbol.
Yes, the chain symbol was how that was like where their platform was connecting people. So it was connecting the career, the people looking for new career medical professions, and the communities that needed healthcare providers. And then one of the other main things it did was like connect students to education and training. And so that was a part of their main mission. And so like as each part is faded in, they talked about each piece of it. I think that like their desire, like we talked through it, and their desire to make it a little more monochromatic was that because there's not one element of this that's more important than the other. And so they all have to work together, and it was more about the sequencing of how things are connected.
Excellent. Now, I've got a question that we received via email, and I'm going to answer. We're going to try to answer all your questions. Bear with us. And still, if you've got comments, you're more than welcome to join us live. Show me that little screen again, because, well, it's quite a big screen. It's kind of eye intensive. I have to enlarge it to see what's there. There was another visual that you showed the process, and there was quite a lot of movement going on.
Sure. Is this the one you're talking about?
Mm.
Or so this one is actually a software. It's a something similar to like a Typeform or a Qualtrics. So it's a space software, and their unique piece of it was their scheduling and how the softwares would be repeated over time to collect analysis over time in the
Mm.
HR sector. So this we did, and I probably should have animated these in because that's how I would present these, but like it animated in first they're defining their key metrics, then they're choosing their schedule, and then they choose their questions, and then it moves to automated emails. And that part is a very linear process. So it's just happening online.
Mm-hmm.
But then once they get to the automated emails, that's the cycle. And so it starts to move in this cycle where they're collecting feedback, they're achieving real-time results. And if that program of surveying is still running, it just continues to loop there. However, once they have enough data, it moves up into analyze results. And then they create an action plan. And if they feel like they don't have the right metrics, they might go back to defining key metrics or doing a new, maybe they need new insight. So they might go back to the beginning of the process. Or if it feels like they're on the right track, but maybe just need more data, they kind of loop back around to collecting feedback and achieving real-time results. And so then the idea of this is that over time, it would actually increase employee engagement because they're learning things about what their employees are thinking and feeling within their
Mm.
business.
Mm.
And
And they know
so
what the
that is,
structure looks like, right? Who's doing what and at what time and what when they are critical in the process.
yeah, and so this visual was actually used to train salespeople. It could have been used in customer pitches as well, but the reason they hired me for it was a consulting company who had acquired a software product, and so the salespeople weren't used to selling this product and didn't really understand like what it did, what the benefits were, and so we
Mm-hmm.
created this visual, and they had. They had sales teams in 5 different countries.
Mm.
And so they needed something that kind of transcended the language barrier as well. And
Mm.
so the visual allowed them to like very simply explain this is how the software works. And that's why the increased employee engagement is what you're selling, but this is how
Mm.
you can achieve that. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of like, I remember sending you that description where it's like many people have watched the talk by Simon Sinek about starting with why. But
Yes.
this is sort of that next step of like, if you say I can help you increase employee engagement with my software, and if your prospective customer says how, you can pull out a visual thinking model and say this is exactly how I can achieve
Mm.
what I'm telling you that I can achieve.
Mm. Yeah,
And so
exactly.
so that's
Mm.
like one of the areas we would use it in business. And this
So,
is like a more
mhm.
complicated version of that for another company. So.
Mm. Fantastic. Oh,
Yeah.
so. In other words,
Yes.
if we look at that, it's a great tool for using when you're working remote with remote teams, right?
Yeah. Excuse
And
me, I just
I
need
think
a drink.
majority of us are working now remotely, so the communication is somehow disrupted. So how does it apply to business and startups nowadays?
Yeah, I think that it can be particularly relevant if we're trying to cross communication barriers. If we're no longer in the room with our team members, or we're no longer in the room with our prospective customers, we need extra tools in our toolbox to sell or to communicate or to even to create understanding, like brand awareness about what you do and what your mission is. And
Mm.
so this could be a tool for you to help explain your message in a way that maybe you don't have access to doing in person right now.
Yes, exactly. So Now, question from the audience that I received via email is, what is visual thinking versus design thinking? I'm confused with all these buzzwords. We
Yes.
are too.
Always. There's always a new type of thinking to think of, to like get your hand on. Is it agile or design thinking? Or there's so many different processes of innovation. I wouldn't say that this replaces design thinking. In fact, when I got started in learning this skill set, I actually worked with innovation designers who were trained by IDEO, who coined the term design thinking. I would say this is more of a tool set that can help you explain what you have learned through design thinking. Design thinking, just for creating a baseline, is considered to be human-centered design. And so they have all kinds of tools. And if you go to IDEO, you can see like a list of tools that they've developed for each phase in their process of design thinking. And so this is more like where I started to learn this skill is I was working with these design thinkers who were doing innovation in senior healthcare, actually. And they would have all of these research learnings. They would have their alpha and beta and all of their studies. And they would need to explain everything they've learned, everything they've researched, and where were they planning to go, very simply to their organization, to potential partners to help bring the innovations to life. So it didn't really replace design thinking at all. If anything, it was just a communication tool to communicate what we learned in the process of innovation.
Right. So it's time to go to another how to call it buzzword, which is pitch deck. So we've got a question for Olga again, and she's asking, how do you use visual thinking in pitch decks? And maybe we can start with what is a pitch deck?
Yeah. So I've helped with quite a few pitch decks, and one of the main, so I would say the area that can benefit the most in pitch decks is the business model with visual thinking. Replace your bullet point with how everything is going to, the relationship of how everything is going to work together. So that's one area, definitely. The second area I would say is your market data. So if you just use the process of like thinking through like what information you have from the market and what message you want to convey to your potential investors, use the process of visual thinking of answering those who, what, why, and how, and those sort of questions so that your data models in market research tell a really compelling story. And like a few little tips is like if you're using some sort of data software or even like a spreadsheet like Google Sheets or Excel, one things that sort of like from a design standpoint always missing from those is very clear labels to explain the different parts of your data visual. So make sure that your labels are easily legible. You don't want people from the back squinting at your pitch deck like, what does that market data actually say? Of course, like a good pitch deck is what 10 to 12 slides typically. And so if you look at every single slide that you have on your pitch deck and say, ask the question, like I'm putting on this pitch deck, how I tell a more compelling story that doesn't repeat what I'm going to say in person, but it supports it stronger so that it's easier to remember. It's good for every slide, but like I said, the market data and the business model, most beneficial.
Great. So how did you, because you're a business person, you're a serial entrepreneur, if I may say so, and you've had a couple of businesses you've been working with, so a vast experience. And and tremendous knowledge. How did you apply that? So if you could give us examples of your businesses and how it helped you create your business.
Yeah, so I mean, the most meta example I could give was even as I was trying to figure out how to package and sell this skill, while visual thinking is becoming a well-known term, we all know the term visual learners. It's one step off of that. Still, a lot of people didn't necessarily understand what it was. And so I had to sort of put my own business or my own set of services through this process of how do I explain what it is I do. And so there have been times where I like create a little visual that explains like how I work and just what it means to use visual thinking in your business. So that's one.
If you could even give us an example, because I've heard you are now working on some artisan project in Morocco.
Oh yeah. So I don't have like a pitch deck for that necessarily yet, just because we're still in the creation phase. But I can explain like what I plan to do. So
excellent.
The reason we were in Morocco during these times were like we arrived in February to complete the rest of our full fashion labels spring line. And once we have this done, then it's time to, once we have the products and we know we have products we want to sell, then it's time for us to make the entire business model. We'll know our costs, we'll know like our general market based on the cost, like what market we need to target towards. And so instead of only writing out a business plan, I plan to create visuals for each piece of the business plan. So that way, when I go to pitch, like for example, in the pitch deck, if I go to for any funding, like seed investment or anything, I can actually show a visual for how the business model will work. And one of the things that we want to do is we don't want to just do like a fashion label. Of course, we want to give back to the communities we're in. We're thinking about ways that can happen, and so we'll show how the revenue generated from the fashion label will actually feed into the other efforts we want to do in the communities that we work with. And so like showing the relationship and the process is something I plan to do there. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I'm actually fascinated because now it's in this world of uncertainty. I think many businesses had to pivot, and knowing. I actually heard a story of recently. One of the investors decided to pull out from the investing, and I wonder how is it going to impact your business or your plan of going to investors with your pitch deck? Did you have to pivot?
We're kind of still figuring that out. We're a US-based company, so a lot of the US economic plans are just starting to come out or become approved. We were also in the process of moving right before we did this trip. So we also have to look at the new state we plan to move to and what their economic packages look like. But I know one thing where we're beneficial at is we don't need money in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And so what we have is 6 to 8 weeks to understand the market, understand what sort of economic stimulus packages are going to be out in the world. And I know that through any recession, or this is like a very unique case. This isn't a recession because of the market. This is an absolute recession because there's no demand right now for many things. And so I think part of that is like we have a lot of open-ended questions. So what we're doing is the process of collecting information and listening to what the market is saying. And as we do that, we'll be researching what opportunities are there, like grants. It is a women-owned company, so we're going to look and see if there are any grants available for women-owned companies for
Excellent.
coming out of this. I think I know it's a lot harder for people who have just received investment and the investors have their money already invested, and now they have to continue to execute even in this like just uncertain market. And so I've even spoke to like colleagues who are working through this, and they're completely reimagining, again, like using imagination to, like, with these new limitations on the market, we still do. How can we still be relevant? And I think that's true for any business today.
Absolutely.
And if you are creating a new business, I've also equally had a lot of entrepreneurial friends ping me and be like, hey, what do you think of this business idea? Because we're all at home and they're thinking of what they can do. Back to how you started this. When people are bored, they actually get inspired to create something. And so I think we're going to see that happen. And I think the
That's
most
great
important thing we
because
can do in that is, we're thinking of creating a new thing, is to kind of pay attention
yeah,
and like research and see what's out
yeah.
there.
So you're in other words, because this is what really struck me when we first spoke. You were so calm. Everybody surrounding me were so, oh my goodness, what do we do? Whereas you were so calm and you were like, I've been working remotely for so many years. There is no big difference. It's only, and I've got a terrace, so it's joyous moments. And you actually are more productive because you're sitting in front of the computer and you're not distracted by many things. And so you're using your time wisely. I love it. So now I think it's time to wrap it up and check what is our lovely artist doing. Hello, Michelle. How are you?
Oh, I try to keep it simple because I think it's really important. The message is anyone can do this. I mean, I just was literally scribbling away. So I started with, okay,
Wow.
where are you,
Fabulous.
camera? So there's Amy in the middle with her visual illustration. And,
I love it.
let's see. Okay, this way. Yeah. Okay, I started going that way with the talk, and any clues that you were saying. Look, there's your popcorn, Beata.
I love it. I just love so
it.
much, and the fact that we've got red lips, and it definitely reflects, our smiles.
I know.
And
You picked that. You picked that. Also, there's a little clap at the end with sunshine in it.
Fantastic. So we want you to succeed. This is the message that we always repeat. This is not, a zero-sum game. This is a time to reflect. This is a time to get back to basics. And Misha's paintings is available online, so you can follow her on Instagram. You can see all the feeds that you can find her on Instagram, on Facebook, and also Amy is available if you would like to connect with her. And so just to wrap it up, Amy, if you could just explain to us, so let's go back to the beginning. So you don't even need colors. You can start with doodling your ideas. You can start what would be the basic tools you could use to visualize your business or your idea or new concept.
I'm sorry, you broke up for me just right at the end. If you could repeat that little.
No problem. So the question is, what are the basic tools you need and how to start the visual thinking process? Just to wrap it up.
Yeah, so the basics are, you can start as low tech as you want. The basics are, like, if you have a pen and paper, you can do this to, if nothing else, to help you process information. The basic is, I think, being aware of the information around you and starting to collect that information and record it. You can write it down in your phone, you can write it down in a notebook. I keep one of these with me at all times. And you can start there. If you want to push it for a presentation, you can use something like there's creative tools out there that are free, something like Canva. You can use Google Slides if that's what you have available to you. That part, use what you have. If you have design skills, you can polish and polish. If not, you can just start with the simple construct of how do things relate to one another. How do I combine information in a way that is easy and simple to understand, sort of like the essence of your idea, and you start at the top and then you peel back the layers of what you're trying to communicate.
Fantastic. So there is lots of tools available online as well, and I hope we can post it later on in the comments. What would be the best way to start? We'll post some links later on. Amy can help with us, be with us. And one final, I think, thought of today is to reconnect with your imagination, because I think the current structure is not allowing us to think freely. So just to give an example, I remember my daughter was very upset because she painted a blue what was it? A red or some color that was not in the color scheme of things. So if your kid is painting a red sky or blue sun, let them think that way, because I think there is also an inspiring story of one of the artists who was very talented, but somehow was not really succeeding at school. And it turned out the teacher said, oh, she's no use, she's not progressing. And then eventually parents went with that kid to the psychologist, and psychologist said, just let her dance. And she's now working on the best scenes. She's now creator of many exciting shows, including Cats and a musical. And that's really strikes me as a great story to say that, you know, how many kids nowadays are dwindled into the mold of not creative thinking, of not using their imagination. Michelle, you've been in the education system, so maybe you could shed a light on this problem.
Yes, you could say I've been in the education system for about 30 years. Yeah.
Just to give you a little bit of background, Michelle has been also advisor of Ministry of Education in Malta. She's very modest.
And well, I'm doing my fashion now. So yes, at schools we are taught to stay within the lines, and entrepreneurship is exactly the opposite. You can't stay within the lines to innovate. I agree completely, Beata, with you, but we do teach kids you have to stay in the lines, you have to conform, you have to do what is expected out of you. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for the audience who kept us alive. And thank you for your comments and for being part of the discussion. I hope we are going to join you again next week. I mean, all the audience, but you're more than welcome, Michelle and Amy, to join us again next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. We've got another show planned, Positivity Hug Delivered, by Amy Gehring, Michelle Gialanze, and me, the founder of Woman on It, Beata Young. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day and be creative. Thank you.